Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. The Eyes in the Forest. Chapter 1. The Trip. Jenny, Mark, Sam, and Lisa had been planning their camping trip for months. They were excited to spend a week in the remote depths of Blackwood Forest, a vast and untouched wilderness known for its breathtaking beauty and eerie legends. They packed their gear, loaded up the car, and set off on their adventure. Blackwood Forest? Here we come, Sam said, grinning as he drove. I've heard it's beautiful, Lisa said, gazing out the window at the passing scenery. It's also supposed to be haunted, Mark added, a mischievous glint in his eye. They say people have disappeared without a trace. Great, Jenny said with a nervous laugh. Just what we need, a haunted forest. As they drove deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and denser, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the road. We're almost there, Sam said, checking the map. Just a few more miles. They finally arrived at their campsite, a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines. They set up their tents and gathered firewood, excited to spend their first night under the stars. This place is amazing, Lisa said, looking around. So peaceful and quiet. Yeah, Mark agreed, his eyes scanning the forest. Almost too quiet. Chapter 2. The First Night. As night fell, they built a fire and sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and owls, but there was an underlying silence that felt unsettling. So, what do you guys know about the legends of Blackwood Forest? Mark asked, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. I heard that people used to live here, but they all disappeared, Lisa said, her voice hushed. They say the forest is cursed. Jenny shivered. I've heard the same thing. They say the spirits of the missing people haunt the forest, searching for new victims. Spooky, Sam said with a grin. But it's just a story, right? As they talked, Jenny felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced around, feeling like they were being watched. But when she looked into the darkness, she saw nothing but the shadows of the trees. Maybe we should turn in, she suggested, trying to shake off her unease. Good idea, Mark said, stifling a yawn. We've got a long day of hiking tomorrow. They extinguished the fire and retreated to their tents, the sounds of the forest lulling them to sleep. Chapter 3. The Eyes. Jenny woke in the middle of the night, her heart pounding. She had heard something outside her tent, a soft rustling that made her blood run cold. She lay still, straining to hear. There it was again, a faint whispering sound, like someone or something moving through the trees. She reached for her flashlight and turned it on, casting a narrow beam of light around the tent. Jenny? Lisa's voice came from the next tent, shaky and scared. Did you hear that? Yeah, Jenny whispered back. I think something's out there. They unzipped their tents and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at their skin. Mark and Sam were already awake, their faces pale with fear. Did you guys hear it too? Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, Mark said, holding his flashlight tightly. It sounded like someone was out here. They scanned the forest with their flashlights, but saw nothing. Just the tall, dark trees and the thick underbrush. Maybe it was an animal, Jenny suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Maybe, Mark said, but his eyes were filled with doubt. They stood there for a few more minutes, listening to the silence. Then, just as they were about to go back to their tents, they saw it. Two glowing eyes, watching them from the darkness. Chapter 4. the watcher. The eyes disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the group in stunned silence. "Did you see that?" Jenny whispered, her heart racing. "Yeah," Mark said, his voice trembling. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Sam said, his face pale. "But I don't like it." They stood there for a few more minutes, staring into the darkness. But the eyes didn't return. "Maybe we should keep the fire going," Lisa suggested, her voice shaking. "Good idea," Mark agreed. "Let's stay close to the fire." They built the fire back up and sat around it, their eyes darting to the forest every few seconds. The night was filled with the sounds of the forest, but the presence of the glowing eyes lingered in their minds. As the hours passed, they tried to convince themselves that it had been a trick of the light, an animal, or their imaginations. But deep down, they knew something was out there, watching them. Chapter 5: The Hike. The next morning, they decided to stick to their plan and go for a hike. They hoped that the daylight would chase away the fears of the previous night. "Let's stick together," Sam said, shouldering his backpack, "and keep an eye out for anything unusual." They set off into the forest, following a narrow trail that wound through the trees. The forest was beautiful, with sunlight filtering through the leaves and birds singing in the branches. But the sense of being watched never left them. As they hiked deeper into the forest, they found signs of the people who had once lived there. An old, abandoned cabin overgrown with vines. A rusted, broken-down car. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. "This place is creepy," Lisa said, her eyes scanning the trees. "I feel like we're not alone." "Me too," Jenny agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's keep moving." They continued hiking, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the air grew colder. "We should head back," Mark said, his voice tense. "I don't like this." But as they turned to go back, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. A low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. Chapter 6: The Chase. Panic set in as the growl grew louder, closer. They turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees and underbrush becoming a maze. "Keep running," Sam shouted, his voice filled with fear. "Don't look back." They sprinted through the forest, the growl echoing behind them. Jenny's lungs burned, and her legs felt like they were made of lead, but she didn't stop. She could hear Lisa sobbing and Mark's heavy breathing. They burst out of the trees and into a small clearing, their hearts racing. The growl had stopped, but the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. "What was that?" Lisa gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," Mark said, his voice trembling. "But we need to get out of here." They hurried back to their campsite, constantly looking over their shoulders. The forest was silent, but they could feel eyes on them, watching their every move. When they finally reached the campsite, they collapsed in exhaustion, their bodies trembling with fear. Chapter 7: The Decision. "We can't stay here," Jenny said, her voice shaking. "We need to leave." "But it's getting dark," Sam said, looking at the setting sun. "We won't make it back to the car in time." "We'll have to try," Mark said, his face pale. "We can't spend another night here." They quickly packed up their gear and started back towards the car. The forest was growing darker, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, as if reaching for them. "We need to hurry," Lisa said, her voice filled with panic. "I don't want to be out here after dark." They moved as fast as they could, but the forest seemed to conspire against them. The trail was harder to follow. The trees seemed to shift and change, and the sense of being watched grew stronger. As night fell, they were still far from the car. The darkness closed in around them, and the whispers started again. Chapter 8: The Lost. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds with a sense of dread. They moved through the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but the trail seemed to vanish. "We're lost," Mark said, his voice filled with despair. "We should have reached the car by now." "We need to keep moving," Jenny said, trying to stay calm. "We'll find it." But as they walked, the whispers grew louder, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like twisted, skeletal fingers. "I can't take this," Lisa sobbed, her voice breaking. "I feel like we're being watched." "We are," Sam said, his voice trembling. "Look." They turned their flashlights to the trees and saw them. The glowing eyes, watching them from the darkness. Chapter 9. The Encounter. The eyes were closer now, dozens of them surrounding the group. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the air grew colder. "What do we do?" Lisa asked, her voice filled with terror. "Stay together," Mark said, his voice firm, "and keep moving." They moved through the forest, the eyes following them, watching their every move. The whispers filled their minds, making it hard to think, hard to focus. Suddenly, one of the eyes lunged at them. It was a creature, unlike anything they had ever seen. Tall and thin, with long, twisted limbs and glowing eyes. It moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes fixed on them. "Run," Sam shouted, and they sprinted through the trees, the creature following close behind. Chapter 10. The Shelter. They ran until they could run no more, their bodies exhausted and their minds filled with fear. They found a small, abandoned cabin and hurried inside, slamming the door behind them. "Do you think it followed us?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Mark said, his face pale. "But we need to stay quiet." They huddled together in the cabin, listening to the sounds of the forest. The whispers were still there, faint but constant, and the sense of being watched never left them. "We can't stay here," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "We need to find a way out of the forest." "But how?" Sam asked, his voice filled with despair. "We're lost." "We'll find a way," Mark said, trying to sound confident. "We have to." Chapter 11. The Plan. As dawn approached, they formulated a plan. They would wait until first light, then try to find the trail and make their way back to the car. They hoped that daylight would give them a better chance of navigating the forest. "We need to stick together," Mark said, his voice firm. "And keep moving, no matter what." "Agreed," Sam said, his face set with determination. "We'll get out of here." The sun rose, casting a pale light over the forest. They gathered their gear and set out, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of the creatures. The whispers were quieter now, but the sense of being watched never left them. Chapter 12. The Desperation. As they walked, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trail was harder to follow, and the trees seemed to shift and change, leading them in circles. "We're going in circles," Lisa said, her voice filled with despair. "We're never going to get out of here." "We will," Mark said, though his voice was filled with doubt. "We have to keep moving." They pressed on, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. The eyes were back, watching them from the shadows. "We need to find a way out," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here." But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the trail. The forest seemed to conspire against them, trapping them in its depths. Chapter 13. The Sacrifice. As night fell again, they found themselves back at the cabin. Exhausted and filled with despair, they huddled inside, listening to the whispers. "We're never getting out of here," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "We're going to die here." "Don't say that," Mark said, though his face was filled with fear. "We'll find a way out." But deep down, they all knew the truth. The forest was alive, and it wanted them. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the creature lunged inside. They screamed and tried to fight, but it was too strong. In the chaos, Jenny saw a way out. A small, hidden door in the floor. She shouted to the others, and they hurried through, leaving the creature behind. Chapter 14. The Tunnel. The hidden door led to a narrow tunnel, dark and musty. They crawled through, their hearts pounding with fear. "Where does this lead?" Sam asked, his voice echoing in the darkness. "I don't know," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. "But it's our only chance." The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the earth. The air was cold and damp, and the whispers were louder here, filling their minds with dread. Finally, they emerged into a small, underground chamber. It was filled with strange symbols and old, decaying artifacts. "This place is ancient," Lisa said, her voice filled with awe. "What is it?" "I don't know," Mark said, looking around. "But we need to keep moving." Chapter 15. The Revelation. As they explored the chamber, they found an old, dusty book. It was filled with strange writings and symbols, describing rituals and sacrifices. "This is some kind of ancient cult," Sam said, his voice trembling. "They must have lived here in the forest." "Look at this," Jenny said, pointing to a page. "It talks about a curse, a spirit that haunts the forest, demanding sacrifices." "That must be what we're dealing with," Mark said, his face pale. "The spirit of the forest. We need to find a way to break the curse," Lisa said, her voice filled with determination. "It's our only chance." They searched the chamber, looking for clues. The book described a ritual that could break the curse, but it required a sacrifice. "We have to do it," Jenny said, her voice shaking. "It's our only way out." Chapter 16. The Ritual. They gathered the items they needed for the ritual, their hearts heavy with fear. They knew that one of them would have to stay behind to be the sacrifice. "We have to decide," Mark said, his voice trembling. "Who's going to stay?" "I will," Jenny said, her voice firm. "I'll be the sacrifice." "No," Sam said, tears streaming down his face. "We can't let you do this." "It's the only way," Jenny said, her eyes filled with determination. "You have to let me." They performed the ritual, their voices trembling with fear. As they chanted the ancient words, the air grew colder and the whispers grew louder. Finally, the ritual was complete. Jenny stood in the center of the chamber, her eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye," she said, her voice breaking. "Take care of each other." Chapter 17. The Escape. As Jenny stood in the center of the chamber, the ground began to shake. The walls trembled, and a bright light filled the room. The others watched in horror as Jenny was lifted into the air, her body glowing with a strange, ethereal light. The whispers grew deafening, and the air was filled with a sense of overwhelming dread. Then, with a blinding flash, it was over. Jenny was gone, and the chamber was silent. The others stood in stunned silence, their hearts heavy with grief. But they knew they had to keep moving. "We have to go," Mark said, his voice trembling. "We have to get out of here." They hurried through the tunnel, the sense of being watched finally gone. They emerged into the forest, the air fresh and clean. Chapter 18. The Return. As they made their way back to the car, the forest seemed different. The trees were brighter, the air warmer. The whispers were gone, and the sense of dread had lifted. They finally reached the car and drove away, their hearts heavy with sorrow. They had lost Jenny, but they had survived. In the days that followed, they tried to return to normal life. But the memory of the forest and of Jenny's sacrifice stayed with them. Chapter 19. The Memory. Years passed, and the forest became a distant memory. But they never forgot what had happened, or the sacrifice that had saved them. Mark became a writer, sharing the story of their ordeal with the world. He honored Jenny's memory, ensuring that her bravery would never be forgotten. Sam and Lisa stayed close, their bond strengthened by their shared experience. They supported each other, finding comfort in their friendship. But the forest was always with them, a dark chapter in their lives that would never be fully closed. Chapter 20: The Legacy. The story of Blackwood Forest became a legend, a tale of courage and sacrifice. The forest itself was transformed, its dark past replaced by a sense of peace and renewal. People visited the forest, drawn by its beauty and the stories of its haunted past. They hiked the trails, camped under the stars, and remembered the bravery of those who had faced the darkness. And in the heart of the forest, where the old cabin once stood, a memorial was erected. It honored Jenny and all those who had been lost to the forest's dark history. The forest was no longer a place of fear, but of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of courage and the enduring legacy of those who faced the darkness and emerged stronger.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.